So Intel is known as a technology company. We've been talking a lot about different technologies y'all are working on today, but your role focuses more on policy. So what does policy mean for Intel, and what are some of the things that you are currently working on?
Well, like most big companies, we have a government affairs department or operation, which in our case, because we're a global company, includes staff in Washington, D.C., where I sit, as well as people in Brussels, people in Beijing, and out in the locations where we have facilities around the world. And I like to describe what we do as really being have two pieces to it. On the one hand, a lot of what we do is play defense, protecting the company's bottom line by reducing the impact or minimizing the impact of regulations and legislation that might have a negative impact on our bottom line. But increasingly, and a lot more fun, is the ability to play offense, which is to help grow the top line by looking for ways in which government policy can enable and in fact grow markets. And in the area of climate change and infrastructure particularly, these are markets that are heavily determined by government policy, driven by public desires, to be sure, but the policies have a big impact in either increasing or decreasing the ability of a company like Intel and its partners to sell solutions into the infrastructure and climate change and efficiency markets.
And climate change and even infrastructure too were pretty top of mind during this recent federal election. How do you see the results of the election, Biden winning? How do you see that affecting topics like climate change and infrastructure?
Well, I think one of the biggest surprises for a lot of people, not all people, out of the election was the fact that the Democrats did not gain control of the Senate and in fact lost seats in the House. I think there were a lot of people in the climate community and in the infrastructure community who were thinking that there was going to be a Democratic government across the board and that very aggressive legislative policies could be pursued. The reality, I think, even if the Democrats win both Senate seats in Georgia, it's going to be a 50-50 Senate, and there are at least 2 or 3 or 4 fairly conservative Democrats who are going to vote with the Republicans on any policies that they view as too, quote unquote, progressive. So we have divided government, which is going to mean several things. One, it's going to mean the legislation that passes is going to have to be more, quote unquote, moderate. It's going to have to be very bipartisan, which may be a good thing for the long term because there's a trade-off between ambition and aggressiveness on the one hand and durability on the other hand. So, to have aggressive policies passed in one government and then 2 or 4 years later have those reversed in a different environment is not conducive to markets. And so maybe a split government situation will lead to more durable policy. One thing you'll see for sure is going to be a lot of activity on the executive side. So the Biden administration certainly will spend a lot of time undoing things that the Trump administration has done, much of which relate to undoing what the Obama administration had done before them. So you have the swinging of the proverbial pendulum. But they'll also take some executive actions and regulatory actions through EPA. I think infrastructure is one area where, quite frankly, there's more reason to be positive about the possibilities for legislation, simply because, number one, there are a lot of Republicans who want to do something about climate change. There's a lot of pent-up demand coming from their constituents, and infrastructure is something that they can support because it involves innovation and it involves jobs. So I think we will see, either through stimulus or through straight up infrastructure legislation, I think we will see some legislation that passes. And I think it'll be tied in with stimulus, it'll be tied in with COVID response. And I should also say that there's kind of a mantra in Washington now, and it's called Build Back Better. And so I think you're going to see people look particularly for grid modernization technologies to really get a push through government policy and government appropriations.
So the past 4 years, it's a lot of renewable energy and climate goals have really been driven on the local and state levels. How do you see that changing with the incoming administration? What kind of leadership do you think we'll see from the Biden administration, and how will that leadership sort of balance out between federal and state level leadership?
Well, I think the state level leadership and to some extent local will continue where it's been. And so whatever the Biden administration and Congress is able to do will be additive on top of that. The states aren't going anywhere. We've made huge progress in a lot of areas related to climate and energy efficiency in the last 12 years. And a lot of that leadership has been related to renewables. And a lot of that policy, most of that policy has been driven by state governments with their renewable electricity standards. Of course, tax benefits that came out of the 2008, 2009 Recovery Act were also a big part of that. But those state pressures, which exist in red states as well as blue states, are going to continue. And of course, there's a massive switch going on from natural gas to coal in terms of generating electricity. That isn't going anywhere. Wall Street has made it clear that it will not finance any more coal electricity generation, and the price of natural gas makes coal pretty much uncompetitive. That isn't going to change. And all of that, particularly on the renewable side, creates demand for more modernization of the grid so that you can bring more renewables onto the grid and balance it in a real-time way as opposed to curtailing excess renewable energy as we find is the case today. So again, I think you're going to have federal leadership to some extent, but the state leadership is going to remain very strong. And I think all of that bodes well for a focus on modernizing our electricity infrastructure.
Yeah, so taking that a little bit further, the infrastructure piece, what sorts of policy do you expect to see around infrastructure?
Well, I think some of it will be in the basic R&D arena. I think there's going to be a move towards more microgrids and more distributed energy sources, particularly renewables. If FERC gets aggressive and Congress gives FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, more authority to push, for big siting projects and big long distance transmission, that'll help. But quite frankly, the politics against a lot of that are still going to be pretty strong. So I think the focus will be on more localization. I think there's going to be a lot of research and demonstration as well as deployment projects. And one of the issues in the utility field, whether you're talking electrical utilities or water utilities, is they are very conservative, in part because of the regulatory framework that they have to deal with at the state level through the PUCs, public utility commissions, and other regulators. They can't just go invest in anything that's out there. So there's going to be a heavy role for the Department of Energy to work with the states to do research and development and work with private sector partners to test out and retest out grid modernization technologies that other markets might have been adopted already, but because of the conservativeness built into the way utilities are regulated, I think that's going to be a huge, huge emphasis.
Well, it's a really exciting time for this industry in general, and lots of exciting things to look forward to, I think, with the new administration coming in. Thank you so much for chatting with me today, for being here today and being part of this event. And we'll check in with you in a couple months and see where we're at with some of your predictions here.
Well, I appreciate it. Happy holidays to you and everyone else.
Thanks, Stephen.